Well, it's been a long time coming, but Leeds United has officially been relegated from the Premier League after their loss yesterday, as well as positive results for Leicester and Everton. And yes, disappointing to see for a team that had so many American players and American coach at the beginning of the season, but I can't really say it's not deserved. I mean, when you look at the Americans at Leeds, I think Tyler Adams is the only one who had a positive effect on the season. But things went wrong with Jesse Marsch when you look at this year. And Jesse Marsch, I know he's a big favorite for the U.S. men's national team job. And if he gets it, I will give him a bit of a chance. But this year wasn't good for him. The recruitment of players did not fix any of the problems that Leeds had. And he did inherit a team full of problems from Marcelo Bielsa's Leeds team. But he didn't fix any of them. And there are a lot of other teams that had issues like Bournemouth, Nottingham Forest, uh, Everton. I think Everton always had the talent, but Dyche was able to get things right. But Marsh didn't really fix any of the problems. The defense is still terrible. His recruits that he brought in just didn't end up fixing things. They still didn't have a good enough striker. He didn't try to bring anyone in at all, which is weird considering, like, I have to assume he had control over the recruitment considering he brought in Tyler Adams, he brought in Brenden Aaronson, as well as Christensen. It wasn't just him bringing in American guys. That's not why Leeds got relegated. But he did not do himself any favors with the recruitment that he had. He couldn't fix the team, and Marsh is a big part of the squad going down. I'd say for the American players at Leeds, Tyler Adams comes out looking pretty good. Leeds got a lot worse after he got injured, and I think he was one of, if not their best player throughout the entire season. And while it was obviously going to be a tough role, I think he did about as good of a job as he could replacing Calvin Phillips. And if he doesn't get hurt, maybe Leeds are able to stay in the Premier League. But hey, he did get injured. And I think despite him having a good year, uh, wasn't enough. Then with the rest of the American players, Brenden Aaronson really didn't help out the team much. He had a somewhat promising start, but he just wasn't able to get the goals, get the creativity for the attack going, and the pressing ended up not being enough for that Leeds team. And there was promise at the beginning of the season, and I think he can turn that promise into good results in the championship, and maybe he can come back up with Leeds, who we'll get into just the whole team a bit later. But I think he's going to be the one player staying with the squad, and I think he can have a good season in the second tier next season. But man, he just wasn't able to help out the team enough, and with the amount of money they spent on him, it's a pretty disappointing signing. And Weston McKennie came in on loan and again didn't really help out all that much. He was put in a pretty tough position having to play in a more defensive role after Tyler Adams got hurt. But if you were just going off of what Weston McKennie did for Leeds, you would not think he was a Premier League level player. And I have to assume that some of the squads that he's been linked with the past, I know that Burnley's been linked with him before. I think Aston Villa, Tottenham, well, not Tottenham now that Conte's gone, but you have to wonder if those guys are taking a second look at McKennie and going, oh, maybe we shouldn't bring this guy in. And he is going to be going back to Juventus. Leeds aren't going to be paying the money that they could have spent for him. Or I think they couldn't with the clause in his deal since they got relegated. But yeah, he's going to be going back to Juventus, and I think his stock has dropped because of that, which might make it easier for him to leave the club if it lowers his price tag. But wasn't a good season for McKinney, wasn't a good season for Aaronson. Tyler Adams did a good job, but yeah, it wasn't the best performance for the Americans at Leeds. And Jesse Marsch, just looking back at the whole season now, did not do a good job. For Leeds, the club as a whole, I feel like this relegation was almost inevitable. The team has looked pretty bad ever since sacking Marcelo Bielsa. And while I don't think that was a bad choice, I mean, when you look back at the Bielsa team and his history as a coach, it was time for him to go. But I think this is kind of an oversimplification. But when I look into Leeds in their past, they've kind of been ran really poorly since the 1990s. Like they overspent on a lot of players, got the team liquidated. They were just a fixture in the second tier, not really threatening for promotion for a long time. And the team was just not doing well, especially for a team of like the history that Leeds has. And then after 20 years of just being an average second tier team, they stumbled into appointing Marcelo Bielsa, who was able to completely turn around the club. and that worked very well for a couple of years. I think it actually went longer than it probably should have since the pandemic gave them an extra break in the squad. But after the team, started to fall off, like all Bielsa teams do after a certain period, it was they still had the problems. They were still a terribly ran club. They never fixed it. Just Bielsa kind of, you know, painted over all those problems. Again, it wasn't the wrong decision to sack him. It was time, but they need to fix some of their own issues. And I think there could be an ownership change coming soon. So maybe those issues will start to be solved in the second tier. They have a lot of good building blocks. Like they should be able to get a lot of money from sales of players like Ganato, some of their other guys. Tyler Adams may be one of them, and I think there is a decent chance they can bounce straight back up. And despite I think their recruitment hasn't been the best, they were able to identify some good young talents. And I think there's some good young players in the squad. I think they have an underrated academy. So I wouldn't be surprised if Leeds were able to come back up if they are able to fix just some of their off the field problems. But yeah, it wasn't really a good season, and it wasn't really a good season is kind of a way that you could describe U.S. men's national team players this year because it's been kind of a rough season. Christian Pulisic and Chelsea were both very bad this season. I don't think there's another way to state it. Pulisic needs to get out of that club, and I think they need to trim down the squad as well. And yeah, Pulisic, I think there was no positives for him this year at Chelsea between not being able to impact the score sheet, picking up another injury, and yeah, it's time to move on from there. And things haven't been the best out in the rest of the Premier League either. I mean, Matt Turner's been glued to the bench at Arsenal. Chris Richards hasn't been able to get time at Crystal Palace, and Crystal Palace finished above Chelsea, by the way. Just throwing that out there. And even around Europe, it hasn't been the best year. Gio Reyna's Borussia Dortmund blew the title, and he actually had a pretty good game in that title loss. But yeah, throughout the season, he's been relegated to being a super sub, and I think he's done pretty well in that role, but not the season that we would have hoped for Gio Reyna. And we'll have to see if maybe next year can be better or if this is just who he is as a player. I think he's got a ton of talent and hopefully he can be better next season. And speaking of guy with talent who hopefully will have a better year next year, Yunus Musa has not been the best for Valencia. Valencia, they should stay up, but that club is kind of in a terrible position right now, so it's obviously not on Musa. But not the best year for him as well. And I think he's another guy who you definitely want to move on somewhat soon from. No, this summer. You've got to get out of Valencia right now. I think it helped him out a lot at the club, but things aren't going well right now for them. And then even throughout Europe, the rest of it, Serginho Dest, his career's basically it took a huge nosedive, not doing well there. And then Tim Weah, maybe he can replace him because he's been playing a left back for Lille, and he has gotten a decent amount of playing time this season, but it's not been the position that you'd want for him. So, it shows versatility, but versatility doesn't really help us when we kind of need him in attack because he's such a dynamic player for us. And yeah, it really hasn't been the best year for us, and I see a lot of people talking about, man, this has just sucked for us, but I somewhat disagree. I think that, well, I'm going to be talking about the USU 20 team against New Zealand tomorrow, but I think next video after that I'm going to be making is going over the US team of the season for like the best players that we've had this year, because there's been a lot of good performances that I want to talk about, because we've had a couple of good performances. Some players who have done pretty well, even some breakout years. And yeah, I think there's some positives we can take from this season, despite Leeds getting relegated, Pulisic not playing, Reyna being a sub, Weah being out of position, Dest, like all of that. But I think there's some positives. And yeah, that's all I got to talk about. See you.